They thought I wouldn't notice, that they could cut down my tree's trench through my land and siphon water from the lake my uncle left me without consequence. The HOA called it community infrastructure. I called it theft. When I confronted them, they laughed. When I filed suit, they retaliated. But what they didn't know is that I owned the lake. Every drop, every shoreline inch, every legal right they never bothered to check. They wanted to break me with fines, threats, and lies. Instead, I broke them. This isn't just about water. It's about what happens when one man stands up and takes everything back. The smell hit me first, a sharp, resinous bite of fresh pine sap bleeding into the cool morning air. It wasn't the gentle scent of a living forest. This was raw, violent, the aroma of wounds still open and oozing. I'd stepped onto the back porch with a steaming mug of coffee, expecting the familiar hush that settled over my property at dawn in Rock Hollow Estates, a quiet subdivision on the edge of Maple Hollow. Instead, the breeze carried that unmistakable warning straight to me. I followed it down the slope. What I found stopped me cold. A stately row of pines I'd planted myself 20 years earlier, tall straight trunks that had framed the path to the lake like silent guardians, were gone. In their place stood only jagged stumps, pale wood exposed, and glistening bark peeled away in long curls, branches scattered across the ground like broken limbs. Tire tracks scarred the earth, deep ruts churned by heavy machinery. Sawdust still clung to the grass in pale yellow patches. The devastation stretched all the way from the ridge behind my house to the water's edge. My grip tightened on the mug until the handle bit into my palm. The coffee sloshed hot against my knuckles, but I barely felt it. This wasn't storm damage. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate, recent, human. I let the mug fall. Ceramic shattered against stone coffee, splashing across the porch boards like dark blood. They had come onto my land. I'd chosen this house on the outer rim of Rock Hollow Estates precisely because it felt separate, far enough from the clustered cul-de-sacs and identical rooftops that I could almost pretend the HOA didn't exist. My lot backed directly onto a natural lake my uncle had left me in his will. Locals had always called it Blanton's Lake, though it had no official name on any map. It wasn't huge, maybe 12 acres of deep, spring-fed water ringed by sloping woods and open sky. But it was private. It was mine. When I retired from the Air Force and bought the place, I wanted solitude more than anything else. A quiet shore where my daughter could visit on weekends and cast a line the way I'd taught her. A piece of ground I could tend with my own hands. Those pines had been the first thing I planted after moving in one for every year I'd served overseas. They'd grown tall and strong, their needles whispering in the wind, shading the trail that wound down to the dock. They were more than trees. They were markers of time, of survival, of a life I'd finally earned the right to live peacefully. Now they were gone. I walked the ruined slope, slowly, boots sinking into freshly turned soil. The damage grew worse the closer I got to the lake. Heavy treads had gouged parallel lines down the hill, and there, cutting a straight, ruthless path away from the water, was a narrow trench cleanly sliced through the earth. It wasn't random. It was precise, deliberate, the sides squared off by a machine. The soil along its edges was still damp, dark, recently disturbed. I knelt, brushing fingers across the exposed dirt. My stomach turned. Last week, I'd noticed the lake level had dropped more than seasonal evaporation could explain. I'd chalked it up to a dry spell, maybe a small underground leak. But now, staring at that trench snaking westward toward the neighborhood, a colder suspicion took root. I stood, pulse drumming in my ears, and turned back toward the house. That's when I saw the sign. A bright orange plastic stake had been driven into the ground at the edge of the slope. A laminated notice flapping gently in the breeze. Community easement work do not disturb. Rock Hollow, HOA Infrastructure Project number 2137. Easement. The word landed like a slap. There was no easement on my land. I knew every inch of my boundary, the way I knew the scars on my own hands. I'd walked it with the surveyor the day I closed on the property, watched him hammer in the iron pins, reviewed every line on the plat map. The lake, the slope, the pines, everything within my fence line belonged exclusively to parcel number 7724, to me. I took out my phone and photographed the sign from multiple angles, then the trench. Then each severed stump time-stamped and geotagged. Evidence, documentation, the habits of a man who'd once recorded incoming fire and casualty counts in dusty forward bases, didn't die easily. Fury simmered low in my gut as I climbed back to the house. I yanked open the file cabinet in my office and pulled out the original deed, the survey, the title insurance paperwork. The lot lines were crystal clear, no utility easements, no community access, no shared rights of any kind across the rear boundary. Blanton's Lake, and every foot of land around it were mine alone. Yet here was proof, arrogant, undeniable proof, that someone in the Rock Hollow HOA had decided those lines didn't matter. They'd trespassed, they'd destroyed, and they'd done it without even the pretense of asking. I stared out the kitchen window at the glittering water far below the morning sun, turning its surface into hammered silver. They thought they could take what wasn't theirs. They thought I'd let it go. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The anger carried me straight to the phone. I dialed the HOA's main line from memory, pacing the kitchen as it rang. 4 times. 5. Finally, a voice as polished and sweet as artificial honey answered. "This is Denise with Rock Hollow HOA. How may I help you today?" "Denise," I said, forcing my voice level, "this is Caleb Mitchell, Lot 42 on East Ridge. I'm reporting trespass and illegal excavation on my property." A brief hesitation. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell. Did you say illegal excavation?" "That's right. Someone cut down 23 mature pines on my land, dug a trench from the edge of Blanton's Lake, and installed underground piping. All without notice, permission, or any legal right." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear her flipping through a script. "I believe that work is part of the board-approved irrigation enhancement project from last quarter," she replied, the sweetness thinning. "It falls within the designated community infrastructure zone for water redistribution and sustainability improvements." "There is no such zone on my parcel," I said. "I have the deed and plat map right here. The lake, the slope, and every tree you destroyed are private property. You had no authority." "Well, sir," she said, tone cooling further, "if you have concerns, the proper channel is to attend the next board meeting. President Langley would be happy to address." "I'm not waiting for a meeting," I interrupted. "I want an immediate cease and desist, a full explanation, and a timeline for restoration." Her voice turned brittle. "If you continue in a hostile manner, I'll have to end this call." The line went dead. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the wall. They hadn't just trespassed and destroyed, they were pretending they were entitled to do it. No apology, no surprise, no intention of stopping. This wasn't a mistake. This was theft wearing a smile. 3 nights later, I walked into the Rock Hollow Community Hall carrying a thick manila folder and a calm that felt like the hush before incoming artillery. The board met every 3rd Thursday in a low stucco building beside the tennis court's more country club lounge than public forum. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and self-importance. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table draped in navy cloth. Only a dozen residents had bothered to show a cluster of retirees, nursing thermoses, a young mother rocking a stroller, 2 dads in pressed polos looking mildly concerned. At the head table sat the 5 board members dressed like they were auditioning for local office. My gaze settled on the man in the center, Gerald Langley, HOA president. Silver hair, perfectly combed jaw, squared from years of practice, smiles, eyes that could shift from warm to icy in a heartbeat. He was the kind of man who remembered every resident's dog's name, but somehow always forgot yours if you ever disagreed with him. He was scanning the agenda when I stepped to the microphone during open forum. "Caleb Mitchell," I said clearly, "Lot 42 East Ridge." Langley glanced up, offered a tight political smile, and nodded for me to proceed. "I'm here to report unauthorized destruction of private property by this association," I began. "Specifically, the clear-cutting of mature trees on my land excavation without permit or notice, and the installation of piping that diverts water directly from Blanton's Lake, a private water body I own outright." A few heads turned. The room grew quieter. Langley leaned into his microphone. "Mr. Mitchell, are you referring to the recent easement maintenance behind your lot?" "There is no easement behind my lot," I replied. "I have surveys, deeds, and county records proving exclusive ownership. What you've done constitutes trespass, vandalism, and unlawful diversion of a private resource." Susan Whitaker, the treasurer, sharp bangs, sharper eyes, interjected smoothly. "Mr. Mitchell, there may be some confusion regarding the community overlay. That area was designated under the Phase 2 Sustainability Plan for Common Infrastructure. "I've read the plan," I said. "It mentions shared pathways and erosion berms, none of which appear on my parcel. You entered private land, destroyed old-growth trees, and tapped a water source that does not belong to the association, all without a single courtesy call." Langley gave a soft, deliberate chuckle that echoed off the beige walls. "When we initiated the irrigation upgrade, we genuinely believed residents would welcome the long-term benefits, enhanced landscaping, stabilized property values, equity across the community. You believed wrong," I said, "and now you will make it right." He folded his hands, smile fading. "If you're suggesting threats, I'm stating facts. You trespassed, you destroyed, you stole, and you will remove every inch of that infrastructure." The room went still. Susan crossed her arms. "We've consulted our land use council. The subdivision covenants grant the association jurisdiction over peripheral water resources within the development envelope. You agreed to those covenants when you purchased Mr. Mitchell." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "I agreed to architectural guidelines and shared road maintenance. I agreed to nothing that allows you to siphon water from a deeded private lake. The boundary ends at my fence line. I can produce county-stamped maps tomorrow, or we can let a judge review them." Silence stretched tight. Langley tapped his pen twice against his notepad jaw, working subtly. "We'll take your concerns under advisement," he said at last, voice cool. "However, I must remind you that baseless complaints or defamatory statements against the association could affect your good standing status." I didn't flinch. "Are you threatening fines because I'm defending my own property?" "We're reminding you," Susan added evenly, "that persistent hostile action can trigger enforcement measures, including liens." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Their strategy was clear: drown disagreement in procedure, bury it under legalese, wait for the homeowner to exhaust himself and give up. But I'd stared down worse than polished threats delivered under fluorescent lights. I stayed at the microphone. "You have 7 days to remove the pipeline, restore the slope, and replace every tree you cut. After that, my attorney handles the conversation." Langley's eyes narrowed. "This board is fully empowered to protect critical community infrastructure. I'd advise against escalating this unnecessarily." I met his stare without blinking. "Then don't dig on ground you don't own." I stepped away from the microphone. The silence followed me out the door like a shadow. Outside, the night air felt sharper, the sky above the lake darkening with gathering clouds. I walked home beneath the first scattered stars. The folder still tucked under my arm, resolve burning steady and bright. They thought procedure would silence me. They thought threats would make me fold. They had no idea who they'd just challenged. The next morning, I was out before the sun cleared the treetops. Old habits from the service die hard, move at dawn when the world is still half asleep and defenses are down. I pulled on boots, grabbed a flashlight and my collapsible entrenching tool, the same steel spade I'd carried through 2 tours, and headed back down the ravaged slope. Mist rose off Blanton's lake in thin silver ribbons, curling around the fresh stumps like ghosts, unwilling to leave. The gouge in the earth looked even uglier in the pale light, a straight, deliberate scar that started near the water's edge and marched uphill toward the neighborhood. Dew still clung to the disturbed soil, proof that no one had been back to cover their tracks since the crew packed up. I started at the lowest point, where the cut met the lake. The ground was soft, almost muddy from the proximity to the water table. Boot prints and tread marks overlapped in a careless mess. They'd worked fast, confident no one would challenge them. I didn't ask permission to dig. This was my land. The spade bit deep on the first thrust. I worked methodically, peeling back layers of refilled dirt in wide, even scoops. 6 inches down, the blade scraped something hard and hollow. I cleared around it carefully, revealing a gleaming white PVC conduit, 4 inches in diameter, factory fresh, no weathering at all. I traced it with my fingers. It ran straight as an arrow toward the lake, disappearing beneath the waterline, under a reinforced elbow joint, sealed with thick silicone. This wasn't a temporary repair or a utility bypass. This was permanent infrastructure, installed with the calm assurance of people who believed they'd never be caught. My pulse hammered in my temples as I kept digging uphill, exposing more of the line every few yards. Continuous, unbroken, expensive. At the crest of the slope, the conduit veered slightly west, slipping under a temporary construction fence I'd never seen before, orange posts, chicken wire surveyor's tape fluttering in the breeze. On the other side lay a small maintenance pad, locked irrigation boxes, a hose bib, and a bright green valve station with a control wheel big enough to adjust flow for an entire cul-de-sac. They'd built an off-take point, a tap, fed directly by my lake. I stepped back chest tight. This wasn't petty vandalism or a misguided community improvement. This was calculated extraction on an almost industrial scale. From that vantage, I could see the upper edge of Rock Hollow's common areas. The manicured entrance lawn, the bubbling fountain that had been installed last summer, the lush new rose beds flanking the neighborhood sign that proudly declared a sustainable lifestyle. Even now, early as it was, the fountain danced in cheerful arcs, water sparkling in the first rays of sun, while my lake level quietly dropped. I took dozens of photographs, close-ups, of the exposed conduit wide shots, showing the lake in the background, detailed images of the valve station with its serial numbers visible. Every frame timestamped, every angle documented. Then I circled the long way around, staying on my side of the boundary until I stood behind the community lawn. The grass there was thick emerald, perfect, irrigated far beyond what municipal water restrictions or the drought should have allowed. I'd wondered last summer how they kept it so green. Now the answer lay buried under my feet. By the time I got back to the house, the sun was fully up and my shirt clung to me with sweat and dew. I spread everything across the kitchen table, printed deed survey maps, the new photos glowing on my tablet screen. The evidence was damning, but something still nagged at me. Trees and a hidden siphon were bad enough, yet the sheer confidence of it suggested they believed they had deeper cover than a flimsy easement sign. I needed more than boundary lines. I needed ironclad proof that the water itself belonged exclusively to me. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Marcy Ellison came the calm, familiar voice. "Marcy, it's Caleb Mitchell. I'm sorry to bother you on a weekend, but I need a favor." "Caleb, no bother at all. How's that lake treating you?" "Someone's trying to steal it," I said flatly. A beat of silence. "Tell me." I gave her the short version. When I finished, she didn't waste time on sympathy. "Your uncle was meticulous," she said. "He foresaw development creeping around the lake and had me file a separate water rights exclusion when the subdivision was platted. I'll pull the estate file and scan everything over this afternoon." "Exclusion," I repeated. "Explicit language barring any external claim. HOA utility district, neighboring parcels on the spring or the lake it feeds. It's recorded at the county, tied directly to your parcel. If they're drawing from it, they're not just trespassing. They're violating a covenant that predates the entire neighborhood." Hope sharp and unexpected flared in my chest. By late afternoon, Marcy's email arrived. I printed every page, highlighting the key section in yellow. The natural body of water and its contributing spring on parcel shall remain the sole and exclusive property of the titled landowner, free from any derivation, shared use, or infrastructural integration by adjoining developments, associations, or public entities in perpetuity. It was airtight. They had no claim. Not even a foothold in gray area. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall of paperwork now covering the table. Their arrogance suddenly made perfect, infuriating sense. They'd gambled that no one would dig deep enough, that a retired vet living alone on the edge of the neighborhood wouldn't have the will, the knowledge, or the stubbornness to fight back. They'd bet against the wrong man. I gathered the documents into a fresh folder, added the morning's photos, and sealed it. Tomorrow the county would see every page. Tomorrow the real fight would begin. But tonight, walking the shore as stars pricked the darkening sky, I felt the ground shift beneath me, not from excavation, but from the solid weight of truth finally rising to the surface. The lake lay calm and unbroken, reflecting the first scatter of light. It had waited patiently through decades of quiet. Now it was my turn to make them pay for disturbing its peace. The following dawn broke clear and cold, the kind of crisp light that makes every detail stand out like evidence under interrogation lamps. By 8 sharp, I was at the county recorder's office in downtown Maple Hollow, certified copies of Marcy's exclusion clause tucked into a fresh folder alongside the deed surveys and my own time-stamped photographs. Brandon, the senior clerk who'd worked that counter longer than most people had owned their homes, spotted me before I reached the window. He was nursing the same chipped NASA mug he'd had for a decade. "Morning, Mr. Mitchell," he said, eyebrow already arched. "You look like a man on a mission. I need this water rights exclusion formally recorded and certified as an active encumbrance on parcel 724, I said, sliding the packet across. There's an active dispute. I want it bulletproof. He adjusted his glasses and began flipping through the pages. I walked him through it step by step: the original inheritance from my uncle, the pre-subdivision survey, the exclusion clause that predated Rock Hollow Estates itself, and finally the photos of the unauthorized conduit snaking out of my lake. Halfway through, he let out a slow whistle. "They really put in a siphon line?" he asked, tapping one of the close-ups. 4-inch PVC professional joints, control valve on the far side, feeding the community irrigation. Brandon shook his head. "That exclusion language is a fortress. Non-derivation clause, perpetual restriction, no adjacent use, no infrastructural tie-in." Whoever signed off on that dig is in a world of hurt. He stamped each page with the official seal, entered the recording data, and handed me back a certified set still warm from the copier. I scanned every sheet to my phone, backed it up to 2 separate clouds, and printed an extra set for good measure. Redundancy wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. On the drive home, I took a detour to a low-slung professional building near the city park. Cameron Blythe, attorney at law. I'd met him the previous year during a volunteer lake cleanup day, sharp mind, rolled up sleeves, zero tolerance for bullies in suits. He'd made it clear then that he enjoyed taking on overreaching HOAs. His receptionist waved me straight through. Cameron was at his desk in jeans and a faded university hoodie, legal pads, scattered like battlefield maps. "Caleb Mitchell," he said, standing to shake my hand, "still keeping that lake clean." "Not since someone decided to treat it like a private reservoir," I replied. His brow lifted. "Sit, talk." I laid it out like a mission briefing timeline, evidence, documentation, the HOA's threats at the board meeting. I didn't raise my voice or pound the table. The facts did the heavy lifting. Cameron listened without interrupting, flipping through the folder, pausing now and then to jot notes or zoom in on a photograph. When I finished, the room was quiet except for the tick of a wall clock. Finally, he leaned back, a slow grin spreading. "You've done half my job already. This isn't gray area covenant interpretation. This is textbook trespass, property destruction, and unauthorized diversion of a protected private water source." "How protected?" I asked. "Marcy's exclusion clause. That's a legal moat with alligators. The HOA has zero claim, none. And installing permanent infrastructure without permits that drags in the State Department of Water Resources and possibly environmental enforcement." He started sketching out next steps on a yellow pad. First, a cease and desist letter, formal demand to remove the line, restore the land, and preserve all evidence pending litigation. We send it certified to every board member and their council. Second, we file complaints with the City Building and Safety Division and the state water authorities. No permits means automatic violation notices, and those carry teeth. Third, he said, eyes gleaming, now we prepare a civil complaint. Trespass, conversion of resources, intentional infliction of property damage, and because they're already threatening retaliatory fines, we add abuse of process and fair housing retaliation claims. Punitive damages are very much on the table. I nodded. I want them to feel the weight. They will, he said. HOAs like this count on homeowners folding early. They spread the fight across 100 small battles, fines meetings, social pressure, until people just pay to make it stop. But when someone pushes back with this kind of documentation, he tapped the folder. The house of cards collapses fast. He paused, studying me. "You sure you want to go all in? It'll get ugly before it gets better." I thought of the stumps bleeding sap in the morning light, of the quiet theft happening beneath my feet while I slept. "I've been through ugly," I said. "This time I'm the one bringing it." Cameron's grin sharpened. "Good. Give me 24 hours for the cease and desist. Then we start swinging." I left his office with a lighter step than I'd had in days. The folder felt heavier in my hands, not with paper but with leverage. That night I walked the lakeshore again. The scar across the slope caught the moonlight like a pale wound, but the water itself lay dark and undisturbed, ancient and patient. Somewhere beneath its surface, the hidden conduit still pulled silent and greedy. Not for long. I had the law now clear, recorded, undeniable. I had counsel who fought like the outcome mattered. And I had 20 years of learning exactly how far a man can be pushed before he pushes back twice as hard. The tide had turned. I could feel it in the cool air, moving across the water in the steady beat of my own heart. They had taken the first swing. Now it was my turn. Cameron wasted no time. The very next morning, a thick certified envelope left his office addressed to every member of the Rock Hollow HOA board and their retained counsel. Inside was a cease and desist letter drafted with the precision of a surgical strike. Formal notice of trespass demand for immediate removal of all unauthorized infrastructure, full restoration of the damaged slope, and vegetation preservation of all related records, and a clear warning that litigation would follow absent full compliance within 14 days. Attached were color prints of the exposed conduit, the severed stumps, the illicit valve station, the county certified exclusion clause, and the plat maps that left no room for interpretation. The final page listed potential claims, civil trespass, conversion, property destruction, and retaliatory harassment, with estimated damages already climbing into 5 figures. Cameron blind copied me on the delivery confirmations. By noon, green signed for receipts started rolling in. Gerald Langley himself accepted his copy at the clubhouse, according to the tracking log. They could no longer pretend ignorance. That same afternoon, Cameron filed parallel complaints with the City of Maple Hollow's Building and Safety Division and the State Department of Water Resources. No permits on file meant automatic investigation triggers. Bureaucracy can be slow to wake, but once roused, it grinds exceedingly fine. I spent the evening reinforcing my own records, organizing photos by date, backing up every email and text related to the dispute, printing hard copies of the certified mail receipts. The binder on my kitchen table had grown thick enough to serve as a doorstop. Friday morning brought the first direct response. My phone rang with the HOA's main number. Denise again, but the practiced sweetness was gone, replaced by a strained professionalism. Mr. Mitchell, the board has received your correspondence and would like to schedule a private mediation session to resolve any misunderstandings. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. There's no misunderstanding, Denise. An illegal siphon was installed on my land. Trees were destroyed. Water was diverted without right or permit. The only thing left to discuss is the removal schedule and the restitution amount. I'm sure the board is willing to explore reasonable accommodations. No accommodations, I said. No mediation. Remove the line, restore my property, and compensate for the damage. Otherwise, we'll see you in court. She hesitated. Mr. Mitchell, escalating this could complicate matters for everyone. Complicate matters for the people who broke the law, I asked. Good. I ended the call before she could reply. The wind off the lake that evening carried a sharper edge, rattling the surviving oaks along the ridge. I stood on the back deck watching the water darken from silver to ink, the hidden conduit still pulling quietly beneath the surface. They were rattled, I could feel it, but rattled predators often lash out before they retreat. The retaliation began the following Monday. An orange violation notice appeared zip-tied to my mailbox, flapping like a battle flag in the breeze. Bold red lettering screamed across the top. Notice of covenant violation, Lot 42. Unauthorized modification of rear fencing along common boundary. Failure to maintain landscaping to community aesthetic standards. Non-compliant exterior lighting fixtures visible from common areas. Daily fine $150 per violation, accruing immediately. I stared at it, heat rising in my chest. The fence in question had stood unchanged for years, pre-approved when I moved in. My lawn was mowed-edged and green enough. The non-compliant lights were the same low-voltage path lights every third house in Rock Hollow used. This wasn't enforcement. This was warfare by paperwork. I photographed the notice from every angle, scanned it, and emailed it to Cameron with a single-line subject. They're escalating. His reply came within minutes. Retaliation, plain and simple. Classic HOA pressure tactic. Document everything. Do not respond directly. We'll fold this into the lawsuit as evidence of bad faith and abusive process. Their overreach is handing us ammunition. But the pressure didn't stop at one notice. Tuesday's community newsletter arrived in my inbox with a thinly veiled community alert section. Langley's prose was unmistakable. Recent attempts by certain homeowners to obstruct approved infrastructure enhancements threaten the sustainability and property values we all cherish. Residents are encouraged to report any suspicious activity around common irrigation facilities and to support the board in preserving Rock Hollow's shared vision. No names mentioned, but the implication was clear. I was now the neighborhood saboteur. The social fallout followed quickly. During my morning run past the clubhouse, a couple I'd waved to for years suddenly crossed the street rather than pass me on the sidewalk. At the local grocery store, Mrs. Kern from Lot 38. Someone who'd once borrowed my hedge trimmers and chatted about grandkids turned her cart down another aisle the moment she spotted me in produce. By midweek, the chill had spread. Conversations hushed when I entered the mailbox cluster. A neighbor I'd helped jumpstart his car last winter avoided eye contact entirely. They were isolating me, painting me as the problem. The old playbook, make the dissenter radioactive, so no one else dares speak up. I'd lived through worse isolation months in forward bases, where the only voices were radio static and distant artillery. Years after losing my wife, when silence became a second skin. If they thought sidelong glances and whispered gossip would wear me down, they were measuring me against a much softer man. Still, the escalation continued. Wednesday brought a registered letter from the HOA's law firm, expensive letterhead, weighty envelope. Inside, formal notice of intent to lien, citing accumulated covenant violations exceeding 1,000 and threatening placement of a property lien if not cured within 10 days. I read it twice, jaw tight. They were trying to hit me where finances hurt, force a settlement before the real claims even reached a courtroom. I called Cameron immediately. They just threatened a lien, I said. He didn't sound surprised. Text me a scan. This is textbook retaliation under both state HOA statutes and fair debt collection laws. We'll file for a temporary restraining order to block any further enforcement actions pending resolution of the ownership dispute. And we'll countersue for abusive process. How soon? Emergency petition goes in tomorrow morning. Judge will likely grant it ex parte, meaning without even hearing their side first given the strength of your water rights documentation. I exhaled slowly. They're not backing down. They're panicking, he corrected. Panicking people make mistakes. Let them keep swinging. Every wild punch is another exhibit for us. That night, I walked the lake under a thin moon. The gouge across the slope looked raw in the silver light, but the water itself remained serene, ancient, indifferent to the human noise above it. I rested a hand on one of the surviving oak's rough bark, grounding me. They could send all the notices they wanted. They could turn neighbors into strangers. They could threaten my home with liens and fines. But they could not take what was mine. Not the land. Not the lake. Not the fight I still had in me. The pressure was mounting, yes. But pressure properly applied forges steel, and I was far from breaking. The inspectors arrived without fanfare on a Thursday morning that felt more like autumn than winter. Low, gray clouds, pressing down on Rock Hollow, the air heavy with the promise of rain. 3 unmarked SUVs pulled into the neighborhood just after sunrise. They ignored the clubhouse and the manicured entrance, driving straight to the scarred slope behind my lot. 4 figures emerged in reflective vests and hard hats, 2 from the State Department of Water Resources, 1 from County Environmental Enforcement, and 1 senior inspector from the City of Maple Hollow Planning Division. Clipboards in hand, credentials dangling from lanyards, they moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had seen every excuse in the book. I watched from the ridge above, arms folded, coffee gone cold in my mug. They began at the lake's edge, photographing the point where the conduit disappeared into the water. 1 knelt to take samples, filling vials from the shallows. Another measured the trench dimensions, noting depth, width, and elevation drop. They followed the buried line uphill, like bloodhounds, pausing every few yards to document the path of disturbance. When they reached the maintenance pad, and the green valve station cameras clicked in rapid succession. Across the greenbelt, I spotted Gerald Langley on his back patio. He'd clearly been roused early, Jim Shorts robe, hanging open, phone pressed to his ear. He paced in tight circles, gesturing sharply, then froze when he noticed the inspectors. Even from this distance, I could see the color drain from his face. That was the moment the balance shifted for good. By noon, the team had relocated to the clubhouse. A simple handwritten sign on the glass door read, "Closed for official audit." One by one, board members were summoned inside. I later learned the questions were direct and unforgiving. 1. Who authorized the pipeline project? 2. What documentation justified construction on private property? 3. Were permits obtained for excavation, piping installation, or water diversion? Langley reportedly spread the blame across a group decision. Susan Whitaker, arriving with her own attorney in tow, quietly handed over email chains that traced the initiative straight back to him. One message in particular stood out, a private thread from 6 months earlier. Mitchell lives alone, keeps to himself. He won't have the stomach for prolonged HOA pressure. Proceed quietly. They'd miscalculated badly. By late afternoon, the county called me directly. Mr. Mitchell, the lead inspector said, voice calm but firm. Our preliminary findings confirm your complaint. The installed infrastructure is unpermitted, crosses a private boundary without easement, and diverts water from a source protected by recorded exclusion. We're issuing an immediate removal order to the association. Non-compliance will trigger daily fines and potential referral for criminal review. How soon can the line be pulled, I asked. 14 days standard. But given the environmental sensitivity and lack of permits, I expect they'll move faster. I thanked him and hung up, the words sinking in like warm sunlight after weeks of storm. That evening, the neighborhood buzzed with a different energy. Porch lights stayed on longer. Small clusters of residents gathered at driveways, voices carrying on the wind. No one glared at me anymore. A few even nodded as I walked past. Friday brought the first cracks in the wall of silence. A woman from Lot, someone I'd only ever waved to, approached while I was checking my mailbox. I saw the inspector, she said quietly, clutching a grocery bag. I didn't know they'd done that to your trees, to the lake. I'm glad someone finally stood up. A father pushing a stroller slowed to offer a quick, heard what's going on. That's messed up, man. Then David from Lot 17 showed up at my door after dusk, 2 bottles of beer in hand. Mind if I come in for a minute? He asked, looking sheepish. We sat on the back deck. He stared out at the darkened water for a long moment. I should have spoken up sooner, he said finally. Langley tried to get a bunch of us to sign a petition claiming you were sabotaging community improvements. I didn't sign, but I didn't say anything either. You're here now, I replied, clinking my bottle against his. That counts. He nodded, took a long pull. Whole place feels different today. Like the air's clearer. It is, I said. Saturday morning brought a carefully worded email from the HOA's legal account. In light of recent regulatory findings, the board acknowledges a possible boundary clarification issue regarding infrastructure near parcel number 72724. Steps are being initiated to address the installations and mitigate impacts. Cameron read it over the phone and laughed out loud. They can't even bring themselves to say sorry or illegal, he said. Classic non-apology apology. Doesn't matter, I told him. The inspector saw it. The state has it on record. They're cornered. Exactly, he replied. And cornered animals either run or fight dirty. My bet is they try one last desperate swing, maybe a lowball settlement offer. Hold the line. We're filing the full civil complaint Monday morning. I agreed. That weekend, the lake lay unusually still, no wind to ripple its surface. Kids returned to the public dock on the far side, casting lines and laughing. The fountain at the neighborhood entrance sputtered once, twice, then went dry, its pump suddenly starved. I stood on my own shore as evening fell, watching the first stars appear. The scar across the slope was still there, raw and ugly. But for the first time since that morning's smell of fresh sap, I could feel the ground healing beneath my feet. The inspectors had come. The truth had surfaced. And the people who thought they could take what was mine were finally learning the cost of being wrong. The fountains went quiet first. It was almost symbolic, the ornate centerpiece at the rock hollow entrance that had greeted every visitor with cheerful jets and soft lighting suddenly fell silent one afternoon. The pump wheezed, coughed up a final weak spurt, and died. By evening, the basin sat stagnant, reflecting the overcast sky like a dull mirror. Algae began to film the surface within days. Then the lawns surrendered. 48 hours after the inspectors ordered the valve shut, the effects rippled outward, house by house. The emerald turf around the clubhouse and tennis courts yellowed at the tips, then crisped entirely. Susan Whitaker's prized rose garden, her personal pet project photographed for last year's holiday newsletter, drooped in surrender petals, browning and falling like defeated flags. The ornamental beds flanking the neighborhood sign withered visibly, leaving bare patches where vibrant color had once screamed prestige. I watched it unfold from my porch each morning, coffee in hand, as the slow-motion collapse painted itself across the community. No dramatic overnight disaster, just a steady, undeniable fade. Perception in a place like Rock Hollow was everything. and perfection had been their currency. Now the currency was failing. The HOA tried desperate measures. Crews appeared with long hoses snaked from residential spigots, portable sprinklers chattering on timers, even a rented water truck that rumbled through the streets spraying common areas in frantic bursts. But it was patchwork at best. The damage was too widespread, the drought too deep, the lost supply too critical. Residents noticed immediately. Questions bubbled up in group texts and driveway conversations. Why did the fountain stop? Didn't we just pay that special assessment for the new irrigation system? Who's paying for all these water trucks? No official explanation came. The board stayed silent, but silence in a small community only amplifies rumor. 2 days later, an anonymous envelope slid under my door. Inside was a single typed page. I was wrong to stay quiet. I walked the slope behind your house last weekend and saw the cut stumps and the capped pipe for myself. Thank you for fighting this. We all owe you. Tucked with it was a printed copy of the original irrigation upgrade proposal, distributed the previous year, complete with handwritten margin notes in different inks. Langley fast-tracked approval, no full vote. Water source never disclosed in any meeting. They told us it was reclaimed municipal overflow. I added both pages to the growing binder of exhibits. By week's end, the HOA called an emergency community forum at the clubhouse. I wasn't invited, but Nina Cordero from Action 6 News slipped in with a resident friend and recorded the whole thing on her phone. She dropped the audio file on my porch the next morning with a fresh tray of brownies. I listened in the quiet of my kitchen, volume low, as the meeting descended into chaos. Langley opened with practiced calm, claiming the irrigation pause was temporary maintenance tied to regulatory review. Residents weren't buying it. A woman's voice cut through first. You told us the new system was sustainable. Now everything's dying. A man shouted over her. I just got a $400 water bill from hand watering my own yard because the common sprinklers are off. Another property, values don't go up when the entrance looks like a desert. Then came the question that cracked the room wide open. Someone near the back voice, steady angry, asked, why was water being pulled from Caleb Mitchell's private lake without his permission? You could hear the air leave the space. Langley stammered about historical access assumptions and ongoing boundary clarification. Susan tried to steer back to procedure, but a different voice rose louder. I motion we remove Gerald Langley as president immediately for misleading the community and risking our finances. The applause was immediate and thunderous. I replayed that moment several times, letting the sound of it settle in my chest. The following Monday, the citations landed. City Code Enforcement issued a formal notice, $32,000 fine, for unpermitted excavation, unauthorized infrastructure, and property damage on private land. County Environmental followed with their own unlawful disturbance of a protected watershed buffer. Cameron filed our civil lawsuit that same Thursday in Superior Court. The complaint was comprehensive. Full replacement cost of the 23 mature pines and professional slope restoration, compensatory damages for trespass and unauthorized resource extraction, punitive damages for retaliatory harassment and bad faith enforcement, injunctive relief requiring supervised board re-election and potential removal of specific officers. We attached everything. Inspector reports, certified exclusion clause, photographs, the retaliatory violation notices, even screenshots of Langley's newsletter propaganda. The story hit the local paper the next day, then Action 6 ran a follow-up segment. Nina ended it with a slow drone pan over the dried-up entrance fountain, sunlight glinting off the green-tinged water like an accusation. After that, the tide turned in earnest. Neighbors who'd avoided me for weeks began approaching again. Apologies came wrapped in banana bread offers to help haul mulch. Quiet thanks murmured over fences. David from Lot 17 spent a Saturday afternoon with me spreading topsoil on the slope. As we worked, he shook his head in disbelief. I really thought this place was different, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. But once the water stopped, it was like the mask came off. Everything looked fake. It didn't look fake, I replied, driving a shovel into the earth. It just wasn't honest. He nodded. Langley hasn't shown his face in days. Let him hide, I said. The truth doesn't need an audience to work. That night, a new petition appeared, posted physically on the community board and emailed neighborhood-wide. It called for immediate resignation of the entire current board and formation of an interim council until supervised elections could be held. Within 48 hours, it carried signatures from 62% of homeowners. Langley resigned first. Susan Whitaker followed 24 hours later. The secretary-treasurer and one remaining director stepped down by the end of the week. The regime that had ruled through intimidation, secrecy, and borrowed water crumbled without ceremony, just a quiet stack of resignation letters and an empty clubhouse. As their grip loosened, something else returned to rock-hollow conversation. Real conversation. Neighbors talking across fences again, admitting they'd been afraid too, acknowledging how much had been hidden in plain sight. The lawns kept fading. The fountain stayed dry. But for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like it was breathing real air. And on my side of the ridge, the lake lay full and undisturbed its surface, catching the pale winter sun like a promise kept. The fight wasn't over. The lawsuit still loomed, restoration work hadn't begun, but the worst of the fear had drained away with the stolen water. What remained was something cleaner, something earned. The courthouse in downtown Maple Hollow was an unassuming two-story brick building squeezed between the DMV and a faded library. But on the morning of the preliminary injunction hearing, it felt like the center of the universe. I arrived early, dressed in a navy blazer and pressed slacks boots polished to a quiet shine. Cameron strode beside me, briefcase in hand, tie knotted with the calm precision of a man who knew the battlefield favored him today. "You ready?" he asked as we climbed the stone steps. "I've been ready since the first chainsaw started," I replied. Inside the courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, dust motes drifting like slow-motion shrapnel. We took our seats at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle sat Gerald Langley, hunched in a suit that looked rented and ill-fitting, silver hair, less perfect than usual eyes shadowed with sleepless nights. His attorney, hired from a bigger firm downtown, sat rigid beside him, flipping through a thin stack of notes that suddenly seemed inadequate. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge, Honorable Elena Vasquez, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, entered and took the bench. She'd already reviewed the filed motions, the inspector reports, and our thick exhibit binder. This wasn't a full trial, yet just the injunction phase, but everyone knew today would set the tone for everything that followed. The HOA's counsel rose first. He spoke smoothly, painting the pipeline as a well-intentioned community enhancement, hampered by unfortunate boundary ambiguity. He downplayed the tree loss as routine landscaping maintenance, suggested the water draw was minimal and temporary, and pivoted hard to my supposed history of non-cooperation, waving copies of the retaliatory violation notices, like evidence of my belligerence. Cameron waited patient, letting the man talk himself into knots. When it was his turn, Cameron stood and began not with words, but with visuals. He cued the large courtroom monitor and displayed the first exhibit, a high-resolution aerial overlay of my parcel boundaries, the lake glowing deep blue, the red line of the illicit conduit cutting straight through private land. Then came ground-level photos, stumps still weeping sap the gouged slope, the hidden valve station. Each image carried date stamps and GPS coordinates. He walked the judge through the documents in order. The original deed from my uncle, the pre-subdivision survey pins, Marcy's recorded exclusion clause highlighted in yellow, certified county stamps confirming no easements, no permits, no approvals. Next, he introduced the state and county inspection reports, signed affidavits declaring the installation illegal, unpermitted, and environmentally non-compliant. Finally, he laid out the retaliation timeline, the sudden flurry of violation notices and lien threats issued only after I challenged the project. By the time Cameron sat down, the room felt heavier, as if the weight of undeniable fact had settled over everything. Judge Vasquez turned to me. "Mr. Mitchell, would you like to address the court?" I rose steady. "Your Honor, 20 years ago, I planted those pines with my own hands. My wife was still alive then. My daughter was just learning to walk. That lake and that slope were the reason I chose this place, a quiet corner, to heal after a lifetime of service. When the association cut those trees dug into my soil and diverted water that belongs solely to me, they didn't just break laws. They violated something deeper, the idea that a man's home, his land, his peace are still sacred. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because someone has to draw the line and say enough. No homeowner should be bullied by the very people elected to serve them." I sat. The judge didn't deliberate long. She adjusted her glasses, scanned the bench notes one last time, and spoke in a voice clear enough to carry to the back row. This court finds overwhelming evidence that the Rock Hollow Homeowners Association engaged in willful trespass, unauthorized resource diversion, and retaliatory enforcement actions against plaintiff Caleb Mitchell. Accordingly, the requested temporary injunction is granted in full. The association is ordered to cease all use of the unauthorized infrastructure immediately, remove the pipeline, and all related components within 14 calendar days under supervision of county inspectors, restore the damaged slope, and replace lost vegetation at association expense per arborist valuation of $42,750. Vacate and dismiss all pending violation notices and lien threats against Mr. Mitchell. Pay plaintiffs reasonable attorney fees to date. Submit to independent mediation for new board elections within 60 days. Furthermore, a formal referral will be made to the State Attorney General's office for review of potential criminal negligence and abuse of authority. The gavel came down sharp final. Langley's head dropped forward, hands limp in his lap. His attorney whispered something urgent, but Langley only stared at the table. Cameron turned to me with a quiet grin and extended his hand. I shook it, feeling the adrenaline drain into something warmer, steadier. Outside the courthouse, the winter sun had broken through low clouds, turning the wet pavement bright. Reporters waited on the steps, Nina Cordero front and center, camera rolling. I gave a short statement, nothing dramatic, just the facts, and a thank you to the neighbors who'd started speaking up. The local paper ran the headline the next morning: Homeowner secures landmark victory against HOA over illegal water diversion. My phone lit up with messages, congratulations from people I hadn't spoken to in years, offers of help with replanting, quiet apologies from former board supporters who'd finally seen the full picture. That weekend, contracted crews arrived under county oversight. Jackhammers and excavators worked methodically, pulling the white conduit from the earth section by section. The valve station was dismantled. The trench filled with fresh soil, graded smooth, seeded with native grasses. I stood on the ridge and watched the scar slowly close. The lake gleamed below level, already rising with winter rains, and no longer bleeding away beneath the ground. The fight had reached the courtroom, and the courtroom had spoken. Justice, it turned out, had a sound after all, the steady thud of earth being returned to its rightful owner. And for the first time, since that raw smell of pine sap woke me, I could breathe it in without anger. Only possibility. Spring arrived early the following year, carried on gentle rains that soaked deep into the slope and washed away the last traces of construction dust. I walked the path every morning, boots sinking into softened earth, watching the new topsoil settle and the grass seed take hold. The scar had closed, completely graded, smooth, mulched, and planted with native wildflowers that now pushed up in defiant green shoots. But the real healing was in the trees. I replanted every one they'd taken. 23 pines each, chosen for hardiness, and deep roots, each set into the ground by my own hands. My daughter came for a long weekend to help, her laughter echoing down the slope as we tamped soil around the last sapling. We placed a small bronze plaque at the base of the tallest one in memory of peace, disturbed and restored. The lake responded quickly. Winter rains and the sealed siphon had raised the water level noticeably. The dock now floated higher, and the herons returned in greater numbers, stalking the shallows with regal patience. Across Rock Hollow, change took root more slowly, but it took. The interim board, elected under court-supervised mediation, was smaller, transparent, and cautious. Monthly meetings were now live-streamed. Budgets were posted online before votes. The special assessments that had funded Langley's hidden project were refunded pro rata. No one proposed grand sustainability upgrades without full disclosure anymore. They asked me politely if I'd consider serving as a homeowner liaison or even running for a seat. I declined with a smile. I'd done my part. The neighborhood no longer needed a watchdog. It needed neighbors. One warm Saturday in May, I hosted the first backyard barbecue I'd thrown in years. Nothing formal, just ribs slow smoking on the grill, coolers of beer, and soda picnic tables dragged down to the new grass near the water. Word spread quietly, and people came. Kids I hadn't seen in months raced to the dock, skipping stones and shrieking when they hooked bluegill. David from Lot 17 manned the grill with me, flipping burgers and telling war stories of his own corporate battles. Mrs. Kern brought her famous potato salad and lingered to apologize again, eyes misty, as she watched the children play. Even Susan Whitaker appeared at the edge of the crowd, hesitant, holding a covered dish. She approached while I was refilling drinks. "I owe you more than an apology," she said quietly. I convinced myself the ends justified everything. But seeing the lawns die, seeing people afraid to speak, I was part of that. "You were," I replied, meeting her gaze. "But you're here now. That matters." She nodded, handed me the dish homemade lemon bars, and stayed for the afternoon. Nina Cordero dropped by toward Sunset Camera, left in the car, just a friend with a bottle of wine, and her husband in tow. She stood beside me on the dock as the sky turned rose and gold. "You turned a theft into a reckoning," she said softly. "I just refused to give them what wasn't theirs," I answered. The sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the lake in fire. Laughter rose from the slope, neighbors talking, really talking, without the old undercurrent of fear. Someone started music low and easy. Fireflies began their slow dance above the water. I looked around at the faces, some familiar, some I was only now truly meeting, and felt something loosen in my chest that had been knotted for years. Not victory, not vindication, just belonging. The kind that isn't imposed by covenants or enforced by fines. The kind that grows when people choose to stand together instead of letting someone stand on them. Later, when the last guests had gone and the embers glowed low in the fire pit, I walked the shore alone. The new pines whispered overhead, needles catching the moonlight. The water lapped gently at the dock, steady as a heartbeat. Blanton's lake had waited patiently through the whole storm. Now it reflected a quieter sky. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, the quiet felt like home. One crisp April afternoon, a young man in his early 30s appeared at my front door. He stood on the porch, shifting his weight, a folded set of papers clutched in one hand, the other hovering as if unsure whether to knock again. "Mr. Mitchell," he asked when I opened the door. "That's me." He introduced himself as Evan Reyes, new owner of a lot, on the far western edge of Rock Hollow. He'd moved in just after the court ruling drawn by the lower prices that followed the scandal. Now he was tangled in a dispute over a drainage swale the interim board claimed was a common improvement, requiring him to pay for repairs that predated his purchase. "I've read the old news stories," he said, voice low. "Everyone says you're the one who knows how far they can push, and how to push back." I studied him for a moment, the same wary hope I'd once felt when I first walked these boundaries. He wasn't angry yet, just confused and a little afraid of making waves in a neighborhood still healing. "Come inside," I said. "Let's look at your deed and the plat map together." We spread the documents across the kitchen table, the same table that had once held my war binder of exhibits. I walked him through the lines, the covenants, the difference between recorded easements and vague community standards. By the time he left 2 hours later, he had a clear plan, a polite but firm letter requesting documentation, followed by a county records request if they stonewalled. He paused at the door. "Thank you. I didn't know who else to ask." "You asked the right person," I replied. "And next time, don't wait so long." He smiled, the tension easing from his shoulders, and headed back down the path lined with young pines, now reaching above my head. Word spread quietly after that. A steady trickle of neighbors, new and old, knocked or called with questions, small and large. Unclear fence lines, unexpected assessments, pressure to approve projects that felt off. I never charged, never campaigned. I just shared what I'd learned the hard way, read every line, document everything, and never assume that's just how HOAs work. The binder of court documents stayed in its drawer by the door next to fresh survey maps and a framed copy of the exclusion clause. Not as weapons anymore, but as reference. Beside them sat a small photo, my daughter and me planting the last new pine, both of us mud-streaked and grinning. She'd asked me once during a quiet dinner by the lake whether I ever regretted staying to fight instead of selling and moving on. I told her the truth. This land was your great-uncle's gift to me. Those trees were my promise to you that there'd always be a place where the world felt steady. When someone tries to take that from us, walking away doesn't protect it. Standing firm does. Not out of anger, but because some things are worth the ground they grow in. She'd nodded, then eyes reflecting the water's slow shimmer. Now, years after the chainsaws fell silent, I walk the slope each evening as the light fades. The new pines have filled out their branches, knitting together overhead into the green cathedral I once lost. The lake lies deeper blue than ever, fed only by its ancient spring and honest rain. No hidden pumps hum beneath the earth. No arrogant signs stake false claims. Just the wind moving through needles, the soft slap of water against the dock, and the occasional laugh of children fishing where they're welcome. I keep the past close not as a wound, but as proof. Proof that one person armed with nothing but the truth and the will to stand can shift the balance for an entire community. Proof that roots once torn out can be replanted deeper. Proof that water, when left to its natural course, always finds its level again. And on the quietest nights, when the stars scatter across the lake like spilled diamonds, I stand at the shoreline and feel it fully. Not triumph, not even victory, just the deep, unbroken stillness of a man on his own land, beside his own water, under his own sky. Finally, completely irrevocably, at peace.